all want to make money by doing something we love. If you could turn your hobby into your job, you'd never work a day in your life, right? Welcome to Hobby Hustle, the ultimate podcast where collecting passion and business collide. Now, here's your host, Zach Nigett.
Welcome to episode 26 of Hobby Hustle. I am your host, Zach Nigett, and thank you for taking time to be with us. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. And if you're a new member or have been listening for a bit, please be sure to like, subscribe, rate us, and of course, share with your friends. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment to share any thoughts or suggestions you have. I greatly appreciate your support, and I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Today's guest is a passionate collector who's built an impressive collection of Michael Jordan, Nikola Jokic, and Christian McCaffery cards over the years. Through his collecting, he's established himself as a respected expert within the collecting community. However, his bigger impact on the hobby might come from his love of numbers. With the sports collectible industry seeing exponential growth in the spring of 2020, the need for a way to track sales data was evident. It was the combination of collecting passion and pricing data that led him to create Card Ladder, the leading collection and pricing data tool. You can find him on Instagram at Chris_Hoj, H-O-J, or cardladder.com. I'm honored to welcome a passionate collector, data nerd, and entrepreneur, Chris McGill, to the show. Chris, welcome, my friend. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Zach. It's an honor to be here. Big fan of what you're doing with the Hobby Hustle. And
appreciate that, man.
Happy to be here, man.
Yeah, like I said, we'll get into some of this card stuff, but you're definitely an expert in the space, and it's going to be great to get some insight from you. But before we sort of dive into it, you are officially the first show of 2025, so Happy New Year to you. With that being said, though, on the card side, is there anything that you're excited for 2025 from a product release or just in general with the sports card market?
Yeah, I'm very excited for 2024 Prism Football to release in full.
Yeah.
In December, the first off the line released, and the other formats will release too. But I'm particularly excited just because I've got a streak going of all of Christian McCaffery's Prism Black Finite 1-of-1s. I have all of them, all of his first 7 seasons. And so I'm going to be out there looking hard for that 8th one, and if anybody happens to come across it, I'm super generous with finder's fees, and I just really need the card. So
there we go. Public announcement, as probably some people know already, but Christian McCaffery Black Finite, hit up Chris. It needs to be into that PC. Speaking of which, breaking news, it will date this a little bit, but the Finite Caleb Williams was pulled, I just saw, which is absolutely crazy. So what are we, like, not even 24 hours into it, and that one's off the board.
Yeah, Zach, I saw that it got pulled. I saw that somebody already purchased it once. It's probably going to get graded, and then it's going to get sold again, and into the Flipper's Vortex it goes.
There we go. Well, that's awesome. Well, Chris, with all my guests, I like to sort of first learn about, your collecting background. And obviously, I think people are familiar with maybe what you collect now, and we can talk about that. But I'm curious about sort of your collecting origins and sort of what are some of those early memories for you?
Yes. My origins are as a kid collecting in the 90s. The first card of significance that I ever owned, I think, was Chris Webber's 93-94 Ultra Power in the Key.
Awesome.
I don't really remember, like, at the time a ton about why I liked that card so much. But when I went back and found my collection from when I was a kid in 2016, that was the one card that was in my one screw down holder. That card got put into it, which is funny too, just because I had, like, taken it out and looked at it so much that the condition was awful. The edges were worn and everything, but I still wanted it in my nice holder. So that was the first card of significance. And you and I both, I think, grew up Bulls collectors, Bulls fans. So that was the other part of the equation too, was the card that always left a mark on me was the Scoring Kings Michael Jordan. I remember going into the local card shop, and there was always a nice copy of that card sitting on the highest shelf. And that card it was imprinted on my mind that this is a very important, great card.
Yeah, heck yeah. Well, I mean, also an ultra card, right? But like those Power in the Key cards were super cool and unique with their foil etching and crazy colors and stuff. So that sort of made him stand out. And obviously at that time, the Fab Five, Weber, a failed championship run, but like nonetheless, he was the guy. So I could see why that made an impact. And then the Jordan Scoring Kings, I think, sort of goes without question. I mean, that card that whole set, right? Just from the design aesthetic and stuff, just is so beautiful and unique. I mean, yeah, sure, there's been thunders and lightning and sort of things that play off similar, motifs and styles, but nothing quite like it, man.
No, and I mean, I know from your collection and my collecting too, we both have gravitated towards the beautiful cards, inserts, and parallels of the 90s.
Totally.
It's such a great era in cards, and I'm just glad we were born at a time when that's what we collected, was that stuff.
I know. And I wish, though, like, to that point, I appreciate when I was in it because I loved collecting, right? But to your point, like the longer term collection stuff and, what some of the stuff I have, and I know you have even next level stuff, but, I didn't appreciate it. And I wish I would have realized what I was doing a little bit more and hold on to some of those cards. Because to your point, like, I mean, what the market's done obviously is crazy, but just in general, the significance of some of that is really impactful in the hobby. And to your point, I think still to this day, in my opinion, not that Panini and, others haven't put out great stuff in the Upper Deck Exquisite, but that was the golden age of creativity, design, just an explosion of what collecting could and should be, in my opinion.
Completely agree. And what's cool too is we have access to arena design. In particular, Jean of Arena Design, who was, and along with her husband, the prominent design team, and she's on Instagram. She can be reached. She did an interview with Josh of Cardboard Chronicles like 5 or 6 years ago now that I still go back to sometimes. It's pretty cool that we can get in touch with her as the artist and the mind behind a lot of those cards.
Yeah,
I'm glad we can do that. I'm always interested to know who designed the cards and what they were thinking.
Totally. Yeah, that was she definitely left her imprint. Well, that's cool. So I know obviously, you said some Bulls, you said some Weber, but your collection has evolved quite a bit and you're definitely into some maybe higher end rare stuff. But can you talk to us a little bit about sort of the mindset and where you've gone from a collecting perspective?
Yeah, man. Well, it continues to evolve. When I first started collecting again in 2016, I went down a few different paths. I went down the path of collecting Michael Jordan, and that one really stuck. And I also went down the path of collecting Hakeem Olajuwon, who was my favorite player when I was a kid. But for whatever reason, just collecting him, it didn't fire me up as much. I wasn't as passionate about it as Jordan. And as we all know, you can't own every card. And when you do own one card, it comes at the expense of possibly owning a different card that you might want more. So I pretty quickly liquidated the Hakeem PC and turned it all into like Jordan inserts and stuff. And
probably a good long-term play, Chris.
I think so. And I was of a different mindset too. Like when I came back to the hobby, I sort of said, I want to collect the best. And that's not for everybody. And that's not how anybody needs to collect at all. There's plenty of people who probably get as much or even more enjoyment from collecting than me when they focus on, their favorite player or their favorite team or something. And it just kind of worked out pretty well that, the Bulls were my hometown team. Jordan was one of my favorite players growing up, and then he's the best. So that worked out pretty well. But, after I did Jordan for like 2 or 3 years, Christina and I started getting into current releases, and that just, the timing of it just happened to line up with 2018-19 NBA season, which was Luka's rookie season. So we started collecting Luka just because he was the main rookie to collect at that time. And that took us down a whole new collecting path of collecting an ultra modern active player that actually we became such big fans of his that we moved to Dallas and moved across the street from American Airlines Center and have been season ticket holders for 3 seasons now. So we got really fired up about collecting Luka. So those are kind of like the 2 big chapters, I think, that happened during the first 5 or 6 years. And then more recently, I've branched off into some football. So Christian McCaffery is a football player that I started collecting a few years ago. Le'Veon Bell is another one, but I don't collect as much of his. I just think that he has really cool cards. He's a fun player. And then in basketball, too, have expanded to Nikola Jokic. He's actually the player that I'm really excited about collecting right now. And I have been most recently, like when I do my 10 pickups of the year to Instagram at the end of the year, they're pretty much all going to be Jokic cards. And the one other guy that I've taken up collecting more recently is Patrick Mahomes. I just think that he's going to end up being maybe the most important player from Panini's entire era. And I just would love to collect that. I sort of almost start with a fandom of cards, and I just love cards. And then from there, I want to get the best cards. And I think Mahomes is going to end up having some of the best football cards ever made. So I'm really excited to work on him, but he's tough to collect. Michael Jordan is, I don't need to tell this to you, but Michael Jordan is so tough to collect. It's so competitive. There's so many people collecting his stuff, but that's what makes it fun, Zach. If it was easy, it wouldn't be fun.
No, 100%. But, and like you said, just for the audience who's not familiar with some of your collection, when you're talking about the best cards, you're collecting a lot of the one-of-ones, you're collecting a lot of the extreme high end of these players that you're mentioning. This isn't like a common card or a card that costs $100. These are big time cards that you are tracking down and putting to your PC. And it's impressive, but it's also really cool to see how passionate you are, and I think it's fun too. Like you said, Jordan is obviously sort of the de facto GOAT, right? In all of collecting. You can argue Mantle, you could argue, some people tell you it's Brady and all this stuff, but outside of that, it's cool to see you, going after Luka. And I apologize, I didn't say that in the intro, because I do know you're a big Luka collector. I really love that you're chasing Jokic. I'm obviously located outside of Denver. I'm still a diehard Bulls fan, but to be able to see him play and do the things he does, and still, in my opinion, and I'd love to get yours quickly, but is underappreciated, man. I mean, I think it's because he's not the sexy athletic guy who's running the court like a gazelle and throwing down the huge dunk. He's just pure fundamentals and doing it at a higher level than anybody else in the league pretty much does it. So I guess that's boring, but the dude is just unbelievable to watch play basketball.
Yeah, I don't mind it at all. It's fun to be able to collect a player that we love who's in the prime of his career, and there's just not a lot of hype, It makes it much easier to collect his cards, much more affordable and less competitive. So I don't mind it. It's our little secret that we get to enjoy. But if anybody wants to sort of figure out how special Jokic is, there's a video that was put out by the YouTuber Jimmy High Roller a week or two ago that asks the question, is this the greatest peak we've ever seen in NBA history? And it's about Jokic. It's got a few million views. It's really good. It's a nice 20-minute summary of why people like Zach and myself are pretty excited about Jokic.
Well, I will have to check that out because I've not seen that yet. I will also be sure to try to put that into the notes so that people can find that video easily, because that would be good. And we'll quietly spread the word on how good Jokic is, even though the guy's won MVPs and championships and everything else. But that's here nor there. So let's shift gears and get into a little bit the business side, Chris. And, I think a lot of people obviously are going to know you from Card Ladder, but, you started your career in law school. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of those early years of your career prior to collecting becoming your, main focus?
Yeah, I did go to law school. I was in law school between 2017 and 2020. I was a non-traditional student. So, I graduated high school in 2004. I went and I worked in the music business and the entertainment business until about 2010 or 2011 full time. Then I went back to school, started at a community college, then went to a 4-year, took a year off to study for the LSAT. But it's funny. It was that year that I took off was 2016. And that was when I got into cards. Like, I was supposed to be studying for the LSAT, but I just turned 30 and I was back in my parents' home, and I just was going through all my old cards, and cards just completely became my focus. And then I did take the LSAT and I did go to law school, but and I went to law school in Southern California. And throughout that whole time, Christine and myself were really into cards, and our LCS was the Bullpen LA, right down there back when it used to be right next to LAX. And we would just go to trade nights and stuff, and we would go buy boxes there whenever we had a few spare bucks. And so I was in law school, and I love being a student. I'd love to find a reason to go back to school again someday, but it was a lot of fun being a student. And when I was at law school, I fully planned on becoming an attorney, and I did an externship with federal bankruptcy courts during my first summer. And then my second summer, I worked for a law firm that I was planning to go to. And then during my third year, I worked at that law firm on Fridays as a clerk. I was fully set on this path. And the thing that just changed everything was COVID, Zach, and which happened during my final semester. About halfway through that semester, March of 2020, classes were suspended. We couldn't come into campus anymore. And all the classes went to pass-fail. It was a weird, scary time. Like, what does this mean for the future of people wanting to work in the law profession? Like, the sitting for the bar exam was being delayed and pushed back. Like, and I had a ton of time, and that's when we started Card Ladder.
Yeah, which is awesome. Well, and maybe it was a little foreshadowing, right? Like, you're getting ready, you took a year off, cards start to come back in there, and everything happens for a reason, right? At least I'm a firm believer of that. So talk to us then. So 2020, COVID happens, Card Ladder becomes an idea. How did that idea sort of come to being?
Yeah, the idea was germinating for years.
Okay.
So ever since I came back to the hobby, when I was in undergrad, I had one major that was 3 different subjects. It was ethics, politics, and economics. And a third of that is economics. I was always interested in markets and economics. And the problem with economics was that it gets really hard when you get to intermediate micro and macroeconomics. A lot of math comes in. So it was the perfect major for me because I was able to do enough economics, but not have to do the full blown thing. But anyway, I was really interested in it. I was fascinated by the card market. Going back to 2016, I was making Instagram posts that were just sort of analyzing the market and just having commentary. And like when I look back, like I've archived those posts, I don't display them anymore. But when I go back and look at them, I just see, the dumb things I was observing. I wanted something about cards, Zach, is like when I was new to it, and I think this is true for a lot of people, there's something about it that just we have like a confidence when we talk about it. We just feel like this is our domain, and we just know. We're just so passionate about it that everything we think must be right.
Right.
But I was wrong about many, many things and said many stupid things.
You can admit those mistakes, though, Chris. That's what's important.
Yeah, exactly. I can. I don't have a choice. If people were to go back and look, they would see the mistakes too. But I was commenting on the market back then, and then I just started getting really interested in getting more data driven about it. And around 2018, we started a podcast called The House of Jordans, and I became friends with Josh of Cardboard Chronicles, and Josh had a blog for Cardboard Chronicles at that time that he allowed me to write for. And I started writing blog posts that were taking lots of data about the Michael Jordan market. I would go and I would gather as many historical comps as I could for lots of inserts and cards that I was interested in. And I would compile them into spreadsheets, and I would turn them into graphs. And sometimes I would post the graphs. But what I was most interested in was trying to predict future prices based on all this data. I was pretty certain that there's something we can learn about where prices are heading if we just start thinking and processing all this data algorithmically. And so I started doing these prediction series on writing for Josh's blog, where I would take 20 Michael Jordan inserts and I would create a formula, and I would input everything that I could find, like population report information, previous sales, rate of growth, how long the last sale was, how long ago it was, and so on. And I remember one of the studies I did ended up getting an 83.3% accuracy. The price that my algorithm spit out was 83.3% accurate with respect to what the final price was, which is a B minus. It's nothing great, but it was interesting, and I think it would maybe have done better than somebody just sort of guessing. So I guess that's something. I was just excited about it. I was just so excited about it. And I just felt like a passion for this topic.
Yeah. And
so we started integrating content like that more and more into the podcast. And Josh and I would always go back and forth about it. And Josh was into LeBron cards, and he knew a ton about the LeBron market. The thing about Josh, he's the key piece to all of this. Josh has one of the most unique skill sets, one of the most unique talent stacks that exists in this industry, because he has the collecting knowledge and he has the collecting history, but he also has the skill as a web developer and as a software engineer. And he also has the skill in terms of knowing how to build a product and the experience and the professional experience and knowing how to do those things. And there's just very few people who combine all those skills. And so Josh was sort of seeing what I was doing, and he also had all of his own ideas and his passions and his professional background. And we just sort of started developing an idea for a product that was just an idea, because he had his full-time job and I was in law school full-time and I was going to go into law. But we just would always talk and, have fun dreaming about doing things. Well, then COVID happened. And all of a sudden I had this 2-month window where I really didn't have to do anything. I put together a little business proposal. And I also had a little bit of proof of concept because around that time with the House of Jordans podcast, I had been compiling these market reports. I had done maybe 1 or 2 or 3, something like that. And I just was like, well, maybe, people who listen to this podcast might be interested in having somebody organize this data. And if they're interested, maybe they'd be willing to pay a fee for it. So I think I was charging maybe $10 or something to get a market report. And I just put the call out hey, if anybody wants this, just here's my PayPal. Mm-hmm. And a few hundred people ended up wanting it. And so I had a little bit of proof of concept there when I was able to come to Josh and be like, hey, maybe we should spend a little more time on these ideas we've been having. Because look, there's actually some demand here for this type of data. And he agreed. So we just the timing worked out perfectly to build it when we built it. And that was the origin.
That's how it all came together. That's really cool and fascinating. And it's actually, I've seen some of your House of Jordan. I know it's, years ago, but it was always fun and cool to see that, not just for the content, but also, all of us, it's like a blast for the past when you see some of these prices and things like that. And you're like, oh my God, hindsight's always 20/20. I'm gonna, shoot myself in the foot. Well, obviously, that's pretty cool. So you start building this, right? You have your proof of concept. How did you guys start to let people know that this was something and you were getting it off the ground? Tell us a little bit about sort of the first early stages of Card Ladder.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that benefited us quite a bit was having networks of friends and collectors that we had established. Josh through Cardboard Chronicles, Christina and myself through the House of Jordans podcast. Mm-hmm. So we had, probably a few thousand people who were interested in supporting just because they're good people and they want to support their fellow content creators.
Even the cause.
Yeah, exactly. It was I think that was really a big factor, especially in the beginning. And we had some marketing tactics. One of the tactics that we used was limiting the rollout. So we had a soft launch on June 23rd of 2020, which was a significant date for us as collectors because 23rd is obviously Michael Jordan's jersey number. 6 is LeBron's jersey number. Josh collects LeBron. We collect Jordan. So we picked that date intentionally. And that was the rollout of our minimum viable product. But it was a soft launch because you could only get access to it if you signed up. So we created a list, and once a week we would bring in a new group of people. But in order to get in, you had to have joined the list. And I think that created some excitement a little bit for people to want to see what this is all about. And, we just kept rolling it out and bringing in more and more people. And I don't know how great the product was at the start. It may not have been very good at all.
Well, that's a part of products, Chris. You got to put them out there and start someplace, right?
Well, and that's what I didn't understand at the time, but that's what Josh understood very well. Josh was like, dude, we have to put out a minimum viable product. This is how this works in software. We just need to do this, and we'll build it, and we'll make it better, and we'll take, instead of just guessing at what customers want, let's get people in there and find out from them directly what they want, and then we'll make it better in response to the feedback. And that's what happened. I think the reason why we had any traction in the beginning was mainly because people believed that if they gave us feedback and encouraged us and believed in us, that we would take their feedback and incorporate it and continue to make it a better product. And in particular, a product that was responsive to what collectors want, what will help them, what they need. And one of the very first things that happened, I remember it was kind of at the 11th hour, a friend of ours, Rodman Martinez, said, you guys need a collection feature. Like, how come I can't manage my collection here? And I remember Josh like scrambling to build that. So it was just a lot of that, it was a lot of getting feedback and responding to people. There were content creators who were just very generous to allow us to come on their channels and talk about it and try to give us a leg up. Like it all had to come together for us to be able to get off the ground.
Well, I mean, there's a little bit of luck in anything that's successful, right? But there's a lot of hard work behind it. And like you said, a lot of the good products, being able to reach out to your customer base and show them that you're actually listening to feedback. And I know, Josh is really responsive to that. Not that you're not, but I know that he's more responsible for, the development side. I think that that's a winning combination for any product, and like you said, being able to leverage as much free publicity as possible to get your guys' name out there also helps. And exclusivity is something that can't hurt. I'm trying to establish myself in the art card collecting community now as an artist. But, part of a big thing with a lot of this is exclusivity, also with card collecting in general, right? You're the 101 guy, like you want the stuff that's limited. So creating some buzz, I think those are all really interesting strategies, that have obviously, been built upon since then. But those are all, I just find it interesting to talk to and let the audience know, where some of these other entrepreneurial mindset and ideas are, in hopes that we can inspire some of them too, and then they can learn from our mistakes or some of our successes. So clearly you guys were doing something right though, because, you started this and 18 months later, collectors came knocking at your door. So can you tell us a little bit about how that deal sort of came about?
Yeah, it happened very quickly, but it also felt like those 18 months were very fast, but also very long.
Sure.
And it's scary being an entrepreneur and sort of staring down an uncertain future, because Christina and I both were, fully committed to making Card Ladder the best it could be. And I was, bypassing the ability, really, with the way law works, especially big law, you get in the pipeline while you're a law student, and you have on-campus interviews and you line up with a law firm, and then that's sort of the path that gets you started. And then once you get into the profession, people jump from one firm to another and stuff, but it's pretty tough to get back into that pipeline once you've left it, especially if you never really even start. And I never even wound up taking the bar, period. I never even took the bar exam. So like I really went, committed very deeply to working in this industry. And it was just, those 18 months where, having no income for a substantial portion of that early period. And then it was amazing. It was stressful. It was all encompassing, but it also, in a different sense, it just flew by. And then all of a sudden, like, here we are, we've gained a little bit of traction in the industry. We've gained a little bit of brand equity, sort of building a reputation as passionate collectors who really care about making a good product and providing data in a way that collectors will find it most useful. And we were approached. Around this time, there was almost like a gold rush of acquiring hobby companies and startups. Like, we were not the only startup that was acquired at that time. We weren't the only one that was acquired by Collectors Holdings at that time. There was this was happening. There was lots of companies that were joining bigger companies. Like you said, like, there's a lot of hard work, but it was also luck that the timing of it worked out pretty well, and we were able to join Collectors. And one of the things about the timing that worked out pretty well was we were 18 months in, and we were in a position where they could really help us continue to grow. And we were in a position where we could become members of this company that are passionate collectors, content creators, in a certain sense, Card Ladder's content. We were able to bring our passion and experience to the table, and they were able to bring their, Collectors as obviously is a behemoth and has a huge reputation in this industry. So they were able to bring that to back us, and they were able to give us resources to back us. And one of the things I'm most grateful for that they did and continue to do, this is what I just think is a hallmark of why it's a great company, is they trust it and they continue to trust us to do what we know how to do best. And if we need resources, or if we need help, or if we can collaborate or work internally with the other parts of the company, then that's great, and we will. But they trust us to run our business and to do it the way that we believe it should be done. So it ended up being a perfect fit. But
yeah, that's incredible,
a lot
man.
of luck to you, Zach.
There always is. Nothing's perfect, and if anybody tells you that they have a perfect product, then I question them because there's always new technology, new features, feature polish. It's a never ending cycle. But obviously it's come a long way. And I was going to ask you, and I'm glad you touched upon that, is it does seem that like Card Ladder still is a standalone business and company, even though you are part of that whole collectors ecosystem. And I know that there's been tie-ins with the Collectors Club and things like that, but maybe speak a little bit more about that. Like, what types of things have they pushed you guys and helped you? Or like you said, is it really pretty hands-off unless you engage them?
It's hands-off. The opportunities exist, but because we are involved with tracking data, and because Collectors owns 2 grading companies, PSA and SGC, but we track more than just those 2 grading companies. We track all the data. We track raw cards, we track BGS, we track CGC, we track HGA, we track tag, all of it. I mean, our duty to this industry is to, as fairly and impartially as possible, record its data, its market data. So one of the things we've always been conscientious about and careful about is making sure that we don't create any additional biases that could bias us towards PSA, that could bias us towards SGC now. I'm not saying that we're perfect. There may be unconscious biases at some level. There is obviously the fact that you can purchase our product in a bundle that also grants you access to certain privileges with PSA and other privileges. So these things exist, and we just have to do our best to try and make sure to the fullest extent possible that we're giving a fair and objective survey of the market data that we're bringing in.
Yeah.
So we've always emphasized that from the start, that this is really important to us. To be agnostic with respect to grading companies is really important to us. And I mean, the Collectors has been incredibly receptive to that, understanding of it, and encourage us to continue to pursue things that way. And Collectors doesn't own a standalone marketplace anymore, but at one time we were a sister company to Golden Auctions. And so we also had to be really careful and do our best to remain agnostic to marketplaces as well. That we don't privilege any marketplace when it comes to reporting data, but that we do it fairly and as objectively and impartially as we can.
Yeah.
So that's always been something that's important to us. That's important to us on a level that supersedes business, although I think it's also good for business that we're impartial and fair. But it supersedes that. It goes to Josh, Christina, all of our credibility as participants and collectors in this industry, and to the credibility of the Card Ladder brand. It just has always meant a lot to us that we try to do our best to be fair and reasonable and objective. So that's one area where we've been very lucky that we've never received any pressure of any kind to do anything other than act with total integrity and try to do the best we can to be unbiased.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome to hear. Not that I would expect anything else, but it's just good to hear it from the horse's mouth. But speaking about that integrity and the data quality and stuff, I know you guys pride yourself on not only having a vast source of data, but also having the most accurate data possible. Can you tell us a little bit, as much as you talked about Josh being the development side, I know you and Christina and there's others involved on the data side, spend hours and hours of your life meticulously coming through that. So talk to us a little bit sort of about those data policies and sort of where you guys sit with that.
Absolutely, man. I'll try to figure out a way. This is like my bread and butter. I could talk about this for hours. So I'm just going to try and figure out a way to do this as briefly as possible. When we started, Card Ladder was strictly card profiles where, we started with maybe around 500 different cards that we were tracking. And one of the hallmarks of our product was that every single sale that came in of every card that we tracked was reviewed for legitimacy by one of our researchers. That's a pretty big process. There's lots of different factors that we would look at. The ultimate question we would ask before approving a sale and allowing it to enter into a specific card sales history and appear on that card's graph, is we would ask, is it likelier than not that this transaction is going to end up being paid and that it's arm's length? And so what we were trying to filter out are shield auctions, sham auctions that are designed to create a fake comp, scams, which also happen in the opposite direction, where sometimes you have somebody who will list a card on a marketplace that they don't own, and they'll list it for a really low price, just hoping that somebody swoops in and pays them for it, and they don't own it. They'll just never send them the card. We're constantly trying to guard against these, for lack of a better word, illegitimate transactions from allowing them to come into the system. And sometimes we would make mistakes and we would think that something was shilled, and then we would later find out from the buyer or the seller that nope, that was a legitimate consummated transaction. But for the most part, I think we did pretty well, pretty accurate. But then the product underwent a radical shift in terms of what its focus was. We went away from being based on like single card profiles and graphs and isolated sales histories to just everything. And that was the rollout of the sales history feature, which is maybe almost 3 years old now. But that feature then, instead of us being focused around like individual card profiles, now the product became focused around this massive database that has all the sales. And then you can search for the sales that you're looking for from within this database. And then we give you lots of tools, make extrapolations based on what you have in front of you. And so the product shifted from being focused on individual card profiles to being focused on this giant pile of data, and then helping our users make the most out of that data. And so we didn't get rid of card profiles, but instead the primary function of those card profiles stopped sort of being pricing information, and the primary focus of those card profiles started being input data into creating indexes. And at that point, our methodology didn't change, but the purpose of it changed. So now it was very important for us and our researchers to have accurate sales data and to get rid of the unconsummated or the illegitimate transactions, because all of the indexes that now are used within the app are based on these vetted sales. The index, some people look at them, but the point of the indexes themselves isn't necessarily that like, hey, millions of people are looking at these indexes. The indexes are used to create one of our hallmark features, which is card ladder value. So card ladder value is a very simple feature. It's a very simple concept. It's just, you take, like, we have thousands and thousands of indexes. We have indexes for thousands of different players. We have indexes for different categories. We have big picture market indexes. We have lots of different indexes. And so what happens is when you're searching sales history, let's say we're looking at a card for Tyrese Halliburton, one of my other favorite players in the NBA, but I don't collect. And we're looking at Halliburton, and we see that he has third-year Prism Black finite of his sold for $2,500, but it sold a year ago. So that's a data point, $2,500 for this card. But we know that Halliburton's market probably isn't in the same place it was a year ago. So is there any way that we can guesstimate a rough estimate of what that card might be worth today? And that's where card ladder value comes in. So card ladder value will take the Tyrese Halliburton index, which is an index based on only cards that a member of our research team is vetting sales for and looking at and reviewing sales for every night. We will take his Tyrese Halliburton's index, which has hopefully only good data coming into it, and we'll look at how much his index changed in the last year. And so let's say Halliburton's index is down 20%. Well, the card ladder value is simply the change in Halliburton's index is down 20% applied to the price that it was a year ago. So what did I say? $2,000 or something I said for the price of that card. So just take 20% off of $2,000, take $400 off of $2,000. The card ladder value will show $1,600 for Halliburton. So that card ladder value feature, that now is why our sales vetting and our data vetting procedure is super important. And then that card ladder value, that's one example. But the other way that it works too is you have cards that sell more frequently, but maybe like Tua. During the season, Tua experienced a concussion this year, and there was a rapid drop in Tua's prices that was happening in real time. And his prices were going down 40, 50, 60%. our index was capturing that because we track cards like his Prism Silver. We also track cards like his NTRPA. We were capturing that, but it's very possible that there were Tua cards that sold a month ago that now are definitely down in value. But if you're only looking at the comp and you're unaware of all the other things that are going on, you don't know that Tua's market has got cut in half. So the card letter value would reflect something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, card letter value is not perfect. It's nowhere near.
Is it about 83.3% accurate?
Okay, well, it's funny that you say that. Okay, because I use the word guesstimate intentionally. We've, as Card Ladder, have always been a big proponent of just giving all the information to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that we publish, dashboard for Card Ladder, and it gets updated every day, is, and I'm pulling it up right here on my phone right now.
Sure.
One of the things that we publish is CL value accuracy.
Okay.
It's right here. It's a CL value accuracy. The value accuracy of CL value yesterday was 73.6%.
Okay.
So yesterday, as a team, we reviewed 1,885 different sales. We vetted a little over 1,800 sales yesterday. What the CL value accuracy is measuring is how accurate was the CL value prediction for those little over 1,800 sales that we vetted. So we know, we have a belief that those 1,800 or so sales that we brought into Card Ladder system, that they're not shilled, they're not scams, that they're probably good consummated transactions. And there was a 73.64% accuracy of Card Ladder value predicting what that went for. And so that number gets updated every day. And honestly, it's right around 70 to 75%. It has been that way for years. Sure. It doesn't move. That's roughly what it is. So if somebody's looking at Card Ladder value, that's a good first step, is to be like, okay, this is about how accurate this metric is in that context. And like, I'm not going to bet my life savings on its accuracy. Right. But it's just a number. It's indicating. It's just a metric. Yeah. It's indicating something. It's a tool. And so that's where the data integrity has shifted in importance. Where now the product isn't focused around these vetted card profiles anymore, but the vetted card profiles now are providing credible data that builds out our indexes, and then our indexes contribute to the CL values that we use. And the CL value application has even taken on a new importance to the Card Ladder product most recently, because we now are offering something called an enterprise API. Okay. Which is where company level people come in and they need the ability to quickly access prices to lots of different cards at once. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem if we're just giving them raw comps, because sometimes, things happen like the Tua market. So we use the Card Ladder value as one of the additional data points that we give users of the enterprise API, so that they can have this algorithm derived value and they can know exactly how it was derived, and they can have the same level of confidence of us that it's based on credible data.
Interesting. So I'm curious, a lot of people will be able to access it from the consumer standpoint, through their PSA membership, through cardladder.com, the various ways you can acquire the product. But this enterprise specific, I'm just curious, do people just reach out to you guys, or how do you, if someone's listening who's interested in that, how would they be able to participate in something like that?
Yes. So there's a new tab that's been added to the cardladder.com homepage not that long ago, maybe a few months ago, that has a little extra information about this. Okay. So if somebody's interested in it, just follow that tab and you'll easily get in touch with Josh, Christine, or myself.
Perfect. That's awesome. And also I want to backtrack, because I love the passion and the detail you're going into, Chris, but I want to make sure that some of our listeners who might not be quite as aware of Card Ladder, what sort of you're really talking about. So within the application, there's sort of two paths you can take. And one is, when you're talking about the Card Ladder value and indexes, that's more tied to what would be the ladder feature, right? Where this is very detailed, stringent data that's allowing you to see specific cards, not all cards, but specific cards of certain players. And then, as Chris is saying, they're meticulously going through, making sure it's really accurate. The other part of it, which, as you had mentioned previously, probably became an even more important part to the regular consumer, is the sales data. That's where you can literally look up almost any card that's ever sold anywhere in the world and find some sort of data points on it. But that's not as meticulously curated and ensured that everything's there. They're saying, hey, here's all your pricing data. Look up what you want. We'll do the best to provide that for you. But that's not the, fine comb and, tooth through basically. But like I said, I just want to make sure that those listening who aren't familiar sort of understand those two differences, because the product is really powerful in both senses. But they're very different uses, as you're mentioning, depending upon what you're looking to do with the app. You
nailed it, man. You nailed it.
Sweet, exactly dude. Right. Awesome, man. So can I have a job now? No. But so, I'm curious though too, because you also had mentioned that, Rodman, like at last minute was like, hey, what about like collection tracking and stuff,
yes.
And you guys do have other sort of feature sets. Can you talk us through, and we don't need to go super deep, but just sort of at a higher level, some of the other cool features that maybe distinguish Card Ladder from other sort of apps out there?
Yeah, sure. I don't know how much they distinguish us, but they're just cool features.
Yeah, totally.
One of them is the collection tracking feature. And I guess we definitely are distinguished in this sense. You can track any card that you own, period, in the collection tracking feature. And we give you a lot of different tools to estimate its value. You can sort of put it on autopilot if you want and just sort of say, here's what I paid for the card and here's the player. And then you can just line it up to that player's index and just ride off into the sunset. We give you the ability to like be the master of your own Card Ladder research universe if you want to, where you can actually create your own search strings, pull in sales of your card at your leisure, and then sort of review and build out your own sales history of the card if you want. You can get that in depth if you want, if you're like a super power user. And then we give you lots of other ways to sort of bring in, you can choose the index that you want to use to sort of estimate the value of your cards. I mean, you can get as in-depth or as hands-off as you really want to be. So the collection feature is really cool. It really allows you to utilize the algorithmic power of Card Ladder value, of the indexes and sales history and so forth. Some of the other cool features is like the industry tab. The industry tab is just like a nice way of sort of thinking about the health of the market as a whole. And I think the most interesting chart on the industry tab is the very first one we show, which is the monthly sales volume. And so that tab is basically, or that chart in particular, is showing you based on all the marketplaces that we track, which are eBay and then all the standalone auction houses, Heritage, Golden, Fanatics Collect, MySlabs, Alt, etc. We combine it all and we just give one big number that says, here's how much money was spent on these platforms, limiting only to sports cards and sealed products containing sports cards, and also including TCG, Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, and sealed product containing that stuff. So it's trading cards and trading cards only. No memorabilia, no jerseys, no game used balls, nothing like that. Just trading cards. And just giving you a high level figure. Here's how much we tracked of these things in a given month. So like for the month of November 2024, we tracked $199 million spent on those things. And that month, if you go back to the month of October of 2024, 231 million. September was 242 million. August was 236 million. July was 196 million. I mean, you can go back and you can look at it, and you can look at it going back years and years and years. There are some caveats. So like we have, there's a document that accompanies this that's linked out from the industry page, like an FAQ. You please read that just because it sort of explains how like we had different levels of data tracking comprehensiveness at different points in time. So like comparing the number that we have for 2014 to the number that we have for 2024 is not apples to apples. Like in 2014, we don't have, for example, buy it now or fixed price data from eBay. So like there's important limitations that exist for different eras here that are represented on the graph that's important to read about. But I think that's something that's really cool that I don't know how many people actually like use or know about that feature. So there's a few. No,
and those are awesome. And that's, like you said, that industry stuff in general is really unique, right? And just understanding not necessarily the health, but just that impact over time, right? As you can see things rising. And I mean, those numbers you're throwing out are just massive, and that sort of gets me thinking, I'd love to just pick your brain quickly. This isn't a deep philosophical question, but there's a lot of talk, obviously, with Fanatics and Panini, and the hobby had its boom, and then it crashed, and obviously it's sort of stabilized, but it's not going to ever 10x, or there's not an interest in it. That was just a flash in the pan. What's your sort of take, especially as we come into this new year, of what from a hobby standpoint, from an industry standpoint? What do you think 2025 holds? Are we holding steady? Are you guys starting to see signs of a major increase, or sort of where's your head at with that?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. Something I like to think about a lot. It's something as collectors we all sort of can't help but think about, just because why would we want to buy great cards if we think that in 6 months or in a year we'll be able to get the card for much cheaper? Right. That was a real conundrum that collectors faced in 2021, 2022, and 2023 was should I be buying cards right now? These cards are so expensive, and maybe I should just sit on the sidelines for a little while, and then maybe things will cool off a little bit. And I think that worked out for people. I didn't do that. I was collecting as actively during the peak as
we're passionate about it, man. You always want to collect new stuff.
Life is short, man. I'm never trying to sit on the sidelines, but in retrospect, it would have been smarter to have done that. Obviously, I picked up some cards during the peak that I've just gotten absolutely hammered on, even some Michael Jordan type of stuff where I just paid way more than it's worth now. And also, though, there's some cards that I bought during that era that are better, that are higher up now than they were then. In particular, players like Jokic. Mm-hmm. So mixed bag. But anyway, this is a question that I think about a lot. I think all collectors think about on some level. It's hey, is it smart to buy cards now, or which direction is this market going to go in? Should I go into overdrive and really try to get cards because I think that things are going to heat up and it's going to be even more competitive in the near future?
Yeah.
Well, one thing I think about, we've had a few cycles in the last 5 years where the early spring portion of the year has resulted in really, really high prices. Mm-hmm. One time we saw that was 2022. In early 2022 that happened. It almost verges on cyclical. And I just wonder, I know that the stock market is very high right now. The S&P 500 continues to sit at or set new all-time highs pretty much every week since July. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin, same thing. Bitcoin's going nuts. There's some belief that there will be rate cuts from the Fed coming up, which tends to increase people's desire to allocate funds to assets rather than keep them on the sidelines and things that are generating low but steady interest rates. So there does seem to be sort of maybe the potential that there will be an increased level of buying activity early in the year. Mm-hmm. Will it be offset by an increase in selling activity? I don't know. That can always happen. People start buying a lot of stuff, but the seller's well, I want to sell into this. And then the demand sort of comes up and meets the supply, and it brings prices right back to where they were. But I don't know. It feels like assets are really going up in value again right now. I don't know why. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It feels like this, or a different way of putting it, Zach, is that it feels like the value of the dollar is just continuing to go down. It's just a different way of saying the same thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. I guess
an interesting point or question to that is sort of do you feel this sort of collector boon, that there's more people coming into the space, and that because of that, to your point, maybe there's just more volume because there's more people who are wanting to buy. And I'm not talking about it the high levels, right? I'm just talking about in general. Personally, I was at the Denver card show this past weekend, and traditionally, as you said, cyclically, right? December shows don't do that great, right? End of the year, people have already allocated funds to Christmas presents. They're saving up for things in the new year. It was bonkers, Chris. Shout out to John for him and his team, but it was probably the busiest show they've had all year. And so I'm just curious, when you are in there looking at data and stuff, if you're seeing any of that or get that feeling, or like you said, it's just sort of hey, it's cyclical, the new year in spring is going to bring its value, and then we'll see a dip, and then it comes back up in July and, does its thing.
Yeah, I think it will end up being cyclical as usual. Like there definitely are trends. One of the things impacts the trends is, like you said, just sort of extra income is being allocated towards like holiday shopping and buying gifts
Mhm.
and stuff. That definitely happens. Another thing that happens too is that it's during this time of year that the NBA season is in full swing, the NFL season is in full swing, the
Yep.
NHL season is in full swing. And like maybe that extra hour that over the summer a working person spends like looking at their eBay and finding cards and or going to the card shop, but maybe now that time is they don't have that extra hour available anymore because it's spent, rooting for their local or their favorite NHL, NFL, or NBA team. So
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
like there's a time constraint that doesn't really get thought about enough, but like there's a time constraint issue that happens that affects the hobby when all these seasons and all of our favorite sports are in full swing too, that eventually starts to let up when the NFL season is over and then fully releases when we make it to the summer. And you still have MLB and stuff, but like it's not nearly as big of a time commitment for people to watch that. So I think those are factors to consider for sure.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I wanted to bring up, Zach, based on what you said of how strong of a turnout the Denver Card Show had, is that if you looking at the industry tab, if you look at the months of August, September, and October of 2024, each of those months was around 230 or 240 million in
Mhm.
total monthly sales volume. That's either the highest or the second highest 3-month span we've ever logged. Uh,
Wow.
there's a span in I'm just kind of eyeballing it here.
Sure, for sure.
There's a 3-month span in 2022. The span of February, March, and April of 2022 might be a little bit higher. But
But
other
that
than
was also like the bonkers peak of, the boom and everything sort of coming to fruition.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, and like at that time, prices were skyrocketing in addition to sales volume, but now a lot of prices have really come down. So, what that kind of means is that people are actually buying more cards now on a total level, like of how many physical cards people are consuming. This tends to suggest people are buying more cards now. They were buying less cards then, but they were paying higher prices.
Mhm.
They're buying more cards now, we're paying lower prices. And this can be a little bit confusing just because like if you look around social media, for those of us maybe who joined social media, let's say I had joined it in 2020 and then like I built friends over 2020, 21, 22, and like all of a sudden now like back then I would post a card and I would get 100 likes and now I get 50, and like
Right.
all of my friends, like half of them are gone, like I don't have nearly as much DMs, and I'm like, wow, like people have left the hobby. And it is true that there are people who came during 2020, 21, and 22 who left. Like that
Mhm.
is undeniable.
Mhm.
But is harder to see is that lots and lots of new people have come in too. One way you can see that is through like this monthly spending aggregate figure. Like that's one way you can see it.
Mhm.
But you can also just sort of see it by the activity that is surrounding like Fanatics activations, by the activity that's happening on these breaking platforms. Another sort of indicator is the unquenchable demand that exists for repack products and how liquid cards are right now offline, in part because of repack products. Like that's something that sort of keep in mind when you look at like our monthly sales volume chart, is that this isn't capturing most of the repack product purchases. Like, yeah, cards
Interesting.
are bought for repacks on eBay and stuff to some extent,
Sure.
but most of that buying is happening in person, or it's happening at card shows, or it's happening through dealers who have connections to the buyers of the repack products. A ton of that is happening, and we're not capturing any of it. So
And sorry to interrupt, but I assume with that also, so you're saying that the purchases of these repackers acquiring the product, but also them then selling that on the whatnots and the Fanatic Lives and stuff, you guys aren't capturing that data either yet.
we
I'm
don't
sure that
have any.
maybe down the line at some point, but like right now, that's not possible.
Exactly. It's
Yeah,
not. It's not. Then there's some logistic reasons for why it's pretty difficult because like,
sure.
we need either like a clear image or a title. And a lot of times like the auctions and stuff that get run on those platforms don't really give either.
Yeah.
So it can be tough to gather that data accurately, but we are working on it. We have had discussions with those platforms about trying to figure out ways to bring that data in. But
Mhm.
yeah, that's a whole other ecosystem that we don't capture. And there are others too. Like everything that takes place in person at a card show or at a card shop, we don't capture any of that. The retail sales that happen from retailers like Dave and Adams and Blowout Cards. We don't capture any of that. The deals that take place on Facebook and Instagram, peer-to-peer transactions that are happening that there are trading card Facebook groups with just hundreds of thousands of there's just so many people who are doing deals in these different venues. And we don't capture any of that unless it gets reported to us as a private sale and then we vet it. So there's so much happening that is outside of our purview. But there's a lot happening inside our purview too. But it's just kind of quietly happening, and it doesn't have any of the fanfare that it had when it was brand new in 2022, when reaching these sort of peaks. But in terms of the data that we're seeing, I mean, we are right there at the highest point ever for how much is being spent on cards on the marketplaces we track.
Yeah, well, that's really encouraging. As passionate collectors and fans of the hobby, right? Like that's an encouraging thing to see. And the other thing too, and again, I don't want to get totally down the rabbit hole into all this, but in addition to all this offline sales and stuff, and just in terms of general momentum, things I'm seeing with market trends, a lot of my friends who are either brick and mortar shop owners, right, or dealers, and then just going to shows and stuff, the amount of TCG enthusiasm is mind-boggling. Not in a way that I discredit it in any sort of way, but just it's becoming so prevalent, almost outpacing sports cards in a lot of ways. And a lot of these brick and mortar guys are saying that that's really, what's helping keep them afloat, because like we talked about, there's so much volatility potentially in sports, whereas these characters aren't breaking a leg. They're not going and breaking the law and things like that. And I think that's also really exciting, as the hobby and collecting in general continues to grow, to see where those verticals are going to take us.
That's a great point, Zach. Yeah. I mean, you see it in some of the grading data that Jeffrey puts out as well. Like TCG stuff is a
here
big
to stay.
Part of the trade card.
Yeah.
It's a big force.
Yep, totally. Well, Chris, as we look forward and talking about sort of these trends and stuff, I'm curious, do you guys have anything you can share with us in the next sort of 12, 24 months that you're excited about with the Card Ladder product?
I wish I did, but we don't really think strategically in terms of like in that long of a time frame. It's just more like we hear from lots of customers. We love to hear from customers, and they'll give us ideas and we'll implement them. So it'll be more like, it's more incremental, it's more like, hey, wouldn't it be nice if Card Ladder had this? And then we'll sort of huddle and say, can we do this? Yeah, we can do this. Okay, we'll add this in.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I like to try to wrap this up, with asking you to reflect a little bit sort of about your journey, right? And tell us what's sort of been your favorite aspect so far in this crazy Card Ladder journey to date, because I'm sure there's still a lot more to be told in that story.
I'm sure there is too, but without a doubt, it's not even close. The favorite aspect of my Card Ladder journey has been being able to work every day side by side with people that I love. That's awesome. So, Josh, I've already talked enough about how much respect I have for his abilities, but it's almost been 5 years of working side by side with him. It's been a little over 4.5. I mean, it's been, he is the perfect colleague for me. I completely enjoy working with him. Christina, it's amazing to work alongside her. She's such a good compliment too, because she likes to do a little bit of everything. She'll get bored if she does any one thing. So like she at different times functions as our chief marketing officer. She functions as our COO. She functions as our CFO. She's also involved in data. She's involved in managing our research team. Like she just does so many different things and does it all with a smile and with enthusiasm and passion. And then my brother, Nick, who's our content guy, I've worked with him for the entirety of both of our adult lives. So when we were both working more in the entertainment industry, we did tons of projects together. He's maybe one of the most talented filmmakers I've ever seen work. I would say the most talented, but I mean, I'm obviously biased. I try to like make it a little more humble, but I think he's amazing at what he does. You can see some of the work that he's done for Card Ladder. He's put out 2 different documentaries about the card show experience. He did one from one of the nationals. He did one from one of the Mint Collective shows. It's on the Card Ladder YouTube page. He also is extremely talented with like graphics and design and stuff. So like he, every day he puts out multiple 3+ social media posts that are tailored to Instagram, to Twitter, to TikTok, to Facebook. He puts out tons of content every day, and I just feel like the quality of the content that he makes and sort of how he brought in like animating and the video component that he brought on top of the graphics, I just feel like it reflects really well on our industry. I feel like it raises the standard of our industry, and it's just amazing to have him, to be able to work with him, to be able to see what he creates and how great he makes all of us look, and he makes the Card Letter brand look like. Being able to work alongside those three people and being able to have done it now for 4.5 going on 5 years, like it's easy. That's by far the best part of
That's awesome. Well, being able to be passionate about what you're doing and then be able to be passionate about the people who you do it with is something really special, man. And that's not easy to find that balance. So congratulations, not only on your success, but being able to, build an environment that sounds like it's really just the perfect fit for you, man. That's so cool.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Chris, this has been awesome. I want to be respectful of your time, and I appreciate you giving us so much of it. But before I let you go, I ask all of my guests sort of if you could give a fellow collector or aspiring entrepreneur sort of one valuable tip and piece of advice, what would that be?
I'm going to make this harder than it needs to be, Zach, and drag this out a little bit more than it should be dragged out. Because, this is like an opportunity to say something a little different. I obviously agree with all of the mantras of just believing in yourself, working hard, choosing to do things that you're passionate about, and finding the reward in the work itself rather than in any outcome. Like enjoying the process is all those things are important. But the piece of advice that I would give that I don't know that you would get anywhere else is that I think my piece of advice is this: make it a huge effort to understand the fact that almost all of our social interactions in this era are mediated through social media and through the internet. Make it a priority to understand how that works and how it's different and how it can be something that you can really get sidetracked and distracted by if you don't put the effort in to understand why it works the way it works. So like, a lot of interaction, especially when you're putting out a product or an artistic release or something creative, you sometimes all the feedback that you're ever going to see is just like 8 comments on a YouTube video or a Twitter exchange back and forth, or like some interacting on a message forum. And there's something that can be learned from that for sure. If you can extract kernels of truth that can help make you better at what you're doing, then do it. But also understand that in previous eras, when we had to talk to each other, we would be in the same room with each other. We would be able to sense each other's energy. We'd be able to read each other's body language. We'd be able to know if we're saying something that's offensive or off-putting. Or there was like a human element that just doesn't exist online when we're, sometimes we're anonymous, sometimes we're using usernames where it's our name, but still there's not the in-person human element attached to it. Sometimes these accounts, that exist, they exist 1 year and then they're just gone the next year. And that there's just, it's so important, I think, to not to indulge in the praise that we can receive in online spaces and to rest on those laurels, because that can happen. And it's important not to get bogged down by nastiness or bitterness or criticism that can happen, and that's intermediated through social media and through the internet. Instead, it's so worth, and this is something that as a society, I don't even think we've figured out how to deal with or come to grips with yet, but we have to begin to come to grips with and understand how, like, the way we communicate with each other, we have to analyze it differently now. Like, we can't, like, if somebody was in my face screaming at me that I'm an idiot and everything I'm doing is wrong and like, wow, how stupid am I would take that very seriously. I'd be like, wow, something is wrong here. I really need to self-reflect and figure out what I've done and improve. But if somebody's typing in all caps at me from an anonymous account online, you're an idiot, you're doing this and all these things wrong, I'll still listen to it. I'll still say I did something to aggravate this person, but I won't take it nearly as seriously as I would if somebody was doing that in my face. If somebody was doing it in my face, it's like, this is unusual. This is odd. There's something weird that I need to think about and reflect on here. But when it happens online, it happens all the time. It's not unusual. People get really upset and really go toe to toe and really go back and forth at each other online a lot. And so there's going to be a tendency to get really upset and concerned. Like, man, I really bothered somebody that they're saying these things, but maybe you didn't. Maybe they're trolling, or maybe they would never actually say that to you if you were face to face, but they're less restrained because it's happening through a social media platform or a comment section. Just sort of understanding the difference in the ways that we communicate and not getting bogged down in the very odd ways that we communicate with each other online, and sort of understanding that we just communicate differently in this format and we have to make adjustments for that. That's the advice that I would give to creatives and to entrepreneurs, is to like really make an effort to understand what internet communication is good for and what you can learn from it, and what it's not good for, and how concerned you should be based on how people talk to you online.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a good lesson in perspective to have, especially, I mean, I have kids, right? And they're growing up in this generation. And to your point, there's a lot of keyboard warriors out there. And I think it becomes even more prevalent in the hobby because there's so many people that are passionate about what they're talking about, and sometimes, cool heads don't prevail. And people take stuff personally that maybe they shouldn't, like you said, because it was misinterpreted. But I think that's really great advice, man. And that's definitely a perspective we haven't heard yet. So I appreciate you sharing that, man.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, this has been an awesome conversation. You have such an amazing story, and I appreciate you taking time to share it with, myself and the audience. It's inspiring to see how much passion that you have, and you've let that guide you professionally, and the success that you're having with Card Ladder. So I just want to wish you a happy and healthy new year. And I'm really excited to see what's in store for you, Josh, Christina, and the rest of the team in 2025. So thank you, my friend. And I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, man. Be well. We'll see you soon. Everyone out there watching, thank you for your time. I appreciate you tuning in. I hope that you found something inspirational or learned something new. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and of course, share with your friends. And remember, keep collecting, keep hustling, and we'll see you next week on Hobby Hustle, where collecting passion and business collide. Thanks so much.
Hobby Hustle is brought to you by Collector Creative. If you're a collectible brand or company looking for help with marketing, branding, design, or development, head over to collectorcreative.com and drop Zach a line. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, connect with us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at collector_creative. And be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'll see you next time on Hobby Hustle, where collecting passion and business collide.